The rise and fall of a legendary snowmobile. The machine they didn't want you to have. What you're about to hear is the story of the most controversial snowmobile ever built. A machine so dominant, so revolutionary, that racing officials literally banned it from competition. This is the true story of the 1972 Arctic Cat EXT, the sled they didn't want you to have. Picture this. It's February 1972, Boonville, New York. The air is thick with two-stroke exhaust and anticipation. Thousands of spectators line the snow-covered tracks, bundled against the bitter cold, waiting to see which manufacturer will claim bragging rights this season. Ski-Doo Yellow, Rupp Red, and Arctic Cat Black are everywhere. The stakes couldn't be higher because back then, what happened on Sunday sold sleds on Monday. This wasn't just racing, this was war. The Great Stock Racing War, and Arctic Cat was about to drop a bomb. The early 1970s were absolutely insane for snowmobiling. We're talking about an era when over 100 manufacturers were fighting for survival, when 500,000 snowmobiles sold in a single year, when racers could win enough prize money at a big event to actually pay for their sled. Crowds of 40 to 50,000 people would pack into places like Eagle River, Wisconsin, and Ironwood, Michigan, just to watch these machines scream around oval tracks. The noise was literally deafening. No joke, completely deafening. And the racing mattered because it drove everything. Ski-Doo had become the top-selling brand in the business largely because of their track victories, and Arctic Cat was hungry to take that crown. Now, to understand why the 72 EXT became so controversial, you need to understand what stock racing was supposed to be. The United States Snowmobile Association, or USSA, created stock classes specifically for production sleds, machines that regular people could buy from a dealer. The idea was simple. If a manufacturer wanted to race in stock classes, they had to build at least 100 units of that exact model and sell them to the public. This kept racing relevant to consumers. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday. But there was a problem. Some manufacturers started pushing the boundaries of what stock really meant. Enter 1971. Arctic Cat introduced the EXT line, purpose-built racing sleds based on their new Puma chassis and powered by Kawasaki free air engines. These weren't modified trail sleds anymore. These were race machines from the ground up. The EXT stood for Exterminator, at least that's what racers believed, and these sleds lived up to the name. Arctic Cat's factory race team absolutely dominated, with drivers like Roger Jansen, Larry Colton, and Charlie Lofton crushing the competition, but Arctic Cat wasn't done. Not even close. For 1972, they went nuclear. Arctic Cat unveiled a completely redesigned EXT that was so far ahead of anything else on the market that it looked like it came from the future. This wasn't an evolution, it was a revolution. The 72 EXT featured a sleek, aerodynamic design with that iconic purple laser-striped hood that became instantly recognizable. But it wasn't just about looks. This machine was engineered to dominate both stock and modified classes simultaneously. Think about that for a second. One platform, multiple engine sizes from a 250 twin all the way up to a monstrous 650 triple, all designed to win everything. The 72 EXT had advantages that other manufacturers could only dream about. Lighter weight, better handling, more power, improved aerodynamics. Arctic Cat built over 4,200 of these machines, flooding the market with what was essentially a race sled you could buy from any dealer. It had a headlight and a 5-gallon gas tank, technically making it a trail sled, but everyone knew what it really was. This was a weapon. And then the racing started. The 250 EXT models absolutely annihilated everything in the 250 and 295 classes. We're not talking about close races here, we're talking about complete domination. The 400 topped its classes, competitors watched in horror as these purple-striped machines lapped them. Dealers selling Arctic Cats couldn't keep them in stock. The EXT was printing money for Arctic Cat, and their rivals were panicking. But here's where things get controversial. Other manufacturers started complaining to the USSA. They argued that the EXT wasn't really a stock sled at all, that it was a racing machine with a headlight bolted on just to meet the minimum requirements. Ski-Doo, Polaris, Rupp, all the major players were furious. They'd been caught flat-footed by Arctic Cat's engineering brilliance, and now they wanted the rules changed. The pressure on USSA officials became intense. Think about the politics here. You've got multiple manufacturers threatening to pull out of racing entirely if something isn't done about these EXTs. You've got dealers complaining that they can't compete against Arctic Cat. You've got racers who'd invested in other brands getting destroyed every single weekend. And then it happened. The USSA dropped the hammer. They banned all 1972 EXTs from stock competition, every single one. 250, 290, 340, 400, 440, 650, didn't matter. If it said EXT on the hood, it was out. Arctic Cat and their loyal racers were absolutely blindsided. This wasn't just a rule change. This was the governing body of snowmobile racing essentially admitting that one manufacturer had built something so good that it broke their entire classification system. Arctic Cat wasn't going down without a fight. They lawyered up and took the USSA to court. The legal battle was brutal. On one side, you had Arctic Cat arguing they'd followed all the rules, built way more than the required 100 units, and simply out-engineered the competition. On the other side, you had the USSA and rival manufacturers claiming the EXT was never intended to be a real production sled. The courtroom drama lasted months while the racing season hung in limbo. Finally, a compromise was reached. The 250 and 400 EXT models were allowed back into stock racing, but the 290 and 340, arguably the most competitive classes, were permanently restricted to modified competition only. This was a partial victory at best. Arctic Cat had proven their sleds were legal, but they'd also been effectively neutered in the classes that mattered most for sales. Here's what's wild though. Despite the ban, despite the controversy, despite everything, the 1972 EXT became the most commercially successful race sled ever built. Think about that. They tried to kill it and it became legendary instead. The platform that debuted in '72 continued as the basis for the '73 and '74 El Tigre, the Arctic-built '75 Suzuki Fury, and every Jag through 1981. Its influence extended into other Arctic Cat models for an entire decade. You can draw a direct line from that '72 EXT to the modern performance sleds we ride today. But the ban had consequences that went way beyond Arctic Cat. It fundamentally changed what stock racing meant and what snowmobiles manufacturers built. Before the EXT controversy, most manufacturers were selling 2-up family sleds with fan-cooled engines. These were utility machines that happened to be fun. After the EXT, everything shifted to single-seat performance sleds with free-air engines designed specifically for speed. The family sled market went into permanent decline. Racing had forced manufacturers to build better, faster, more exciting machines, but it had also narrowed their focus dramatically. Competitors scrambled to respond. Ski-Doo completely abandoned their traditional engine-on-a-steel tunnel design to create the TNT Free Air, a contemporary design specifically engineered to match the EXT. This new template with a front-mounted engine in an aluminum chassis would be used for all new Bombardier snowmobiles going forward. Polaris updated their TX line. Rupp developed the Nitro. Everyone was chasing Arctic Cat, trying to build their own version of what the EXT had pioneered. The irony is brutal. Arctic Cat built a machine so good that it changed the entire industry, forced their competitors to innovate and created the modern performance snowmobile category. But they also triggered a backlash that resulted in their flagship model being banned from the competitions that made it famous. It's the classic innovator's dilemma. Be too far ahead of everyone else, and they'll change the rules to slow you down. For the racers who owned 72 EXTs, the ban was devastating. Many had invested thousands of dollars in what they believed was a legal stock race sled. Suddenly, their machines were either completely illegal or relegated to classes where they couldn't compete effectively against purpose-built modified sleds. Some modified their EXTs with aftermarket parts, trying to make them competitive in mod classes. Others chopped holes in the hoods, added louvers, anything to squeeze out more performance from the free air engines that hated excess heat. You can still find 72 EXTs today, with all sorts of owner modifications from that era. Desperate attempts to keep racing machines that had been outlawed from their natural habitat. The purple laser-striped hood became a symbol of rebellion. Owning an EXT meant you'd bought the machine they tried to ban, the sled that was too fast, too advanced, too dominant. It was snowmobiling's muscle car, the performance machine that scared the establishment. And just like classic muscle cars, EXTs became increasingly valuable as time went on. Today, finding an original 72 EXT in good condition is like finding treasure. They're worth anywhere from $300 to over $800 depending on condition and originality, which might not sound like much. But for a 50-year-old snowmobile, that's serious collector money. The story gets even more interesting when you look at what happened to Arctic Cat as a company. Through the 70s, they continued to dominate racing and push performance boundaries. But the industry was changing. The 1973 oil crisis hit hard. Warmer winters affected sales. Over 90 of those 100-plus manufacturers went bankrupt or got acquired by bigger companies. The boom times were over. By 1981, even mighty Arctic Cat, the company that had built the legendary EXT, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The banks who'd loaned them $48.5 million got nervous and called in the debt. 11 days later, Arctic Cat was done. Or so everyone thought. But here's where the story becomes almost mythical. In 1984, a new company called Arctco was formed by former Arctic Cat executives who refused to let the brand die. They bought the rights, the tooling, the name, everything. Arctic Cat rose from the ashes like a phoenix. They started building sleds again, continuing the legacy that the EXT had established. The brand that had been killed by bankruptcy came back stronger, eventually becoming one of the big four manufacturers alongside Ski-Doo, Polaris, and Yamaha. The 72 EXT taught the industry crucial lessons. It proved that purpose-built race sleds could be commercially successful production machines. It demonstrated that consumers wanted performance, not just utility. It showed that innovation could be so disruptive that it literally breaks the established rules. And maybe most importantly, it revealed that in snowmobiling, just like in any competitive industry, being the best isn't always enough. Sometimes politics, business interests, and fear of change matter more than pure engineering excellence. Looking at modern snowmobiles, you can see the EXT's DNA everywhere. Today's high-performance sleds with their lightweight chassis, powerful engines, and race-bred suspensions are direct descendants of what Arctic Cat pioneered in '72. The idea that a snowmobile should be a finely tuned performance machine rather than just winter transportation, that came from the EXT era. The connection between racing success and consumer sales, that relationship was forged in the crucible of the stock racing wars when the EXT dominated everything in sight. Think about what Arctic Cat accomplished. They built a machine so revolutionary that it forced the entire industry to evolve or die. They created a sled so dominant that racing officials had to rewrite the rules. They proved that a relatively small manufacturer from Thief River Falls, Minnesota, could out-engineer giants like Bombardier. The 72 EXT wasn't just a snowmobile, it was a statement. It said that innovation matters, that engineering excellence can overcome bigger budgets and established market positions, and that sometimes the best way to win is to change the game entirely. If you're enjoying this deep dive into snowmobile history, do me a favor and smash that like button. This channel is still growing, and your support helps me create more content about the legendary machines that shaped power sports. And hit subscribe so you don't miss future videos about the sleds, bikes, and stories that changed everything. The ban of the 72 EXT represents one of the most controversial moments in motorsports history. It wasn't like modern racing, where technical regulations are incredibly detailed and specific. Back then, stock racing had relatively simple rules, and Arctic Cat found a way to maximize performance within those rules. When they succeeded too well, instead of other manufacturers stepping up their game, they lobbied to have the rules changed retroactively. Imagine if that happened in modern racing. Picture if Ferrari built a Formula One car so fast that the FIA banned it mid-season. That's essentially what happened with the exterior. The human stories behind these machines make it even more compelling. There were racers who'd saved for years to buy an EXT, kids who idolized drivers like Larry Colton and Charlie Lofton screaming around tracks on purple striped machines. There were dealers who'd bet their businesses on Arctic Cat only to watch their flagship racing program get kneecapped by politics. There were engineers at Arctic Cat who'd poured their hearts into creating something revolutionary, only to see it banned before it could fully prove its dominance. These weren't just machines, they were dreams and livelihoods and careers. What makes the EXT story resonate today is that it's fundamentally about the tension between innovation and regulation, between pushing boundaries and maintaining fairness, between engineering excellence and competitive balance. These same debates happen in every form of motorsports, in every competitive industry. When Tesla builds electric cars that outperform traditional vehicles, legacy automakers lobby for regulatory changes. When DJI creates drones that dominate the market, competitors push for restrictions. The 72 EXT was fighting the same battles we still fight today, just on snow instead of pavement or in the air. Here's something most people don't know. Even after the ban, even after the compromise that allowed some EXT models back into racing, Arctic Cat never backed down from their performance-first philosophy. They took everything they learned from the EXT and poured it into the 73 El Tigre, essentially the same sled with a headlight and Kawasaki green instead of Arctic purple trim. They built them in huge numbers, promoted them as performance trail sleds, and dared anyone to complain. Their competitors had to respond by creating their own performance machines. Within a few years, the entire industry had shifted to the model that Arctic Cat pioneered. They'd won the war by losing the battle. The legacy of the 72 EXT extends beyond just snowmobiles. It's a masterclass in how to respond when your innovation gets blocked by establishment forces. Arctic Cat didn't give up. They didn't compromise their vision. They found another way to bring their engineering excellence to market. They proved that great products eventually win, even if the path to victory is longer and more difficult than expected. That's a lesson every innovator, every entrepreneur, every engineer should remember. Today, vintage EXTs are treasured by collectors who understand their significance. Restoring a 72 EXT is a labor of love because finding original parts is incredibly difficult. These machines were raced hard, modified extensively, and often abandoned when they broke down in remote areas. The purple laser-striped hoods are particularly rare in good condition. Original Kawasaki engines with the correct specifications are valuable on their own. When a fully restored, numbers-matching 72 EXT comes up for sale, serious collectors take notice. These aren't just old snowmobiles, they're pieces of motorsports history. Artifacts from an era when snowmobiling was exploding in popularity. and manufacturers would do anything to gain an edge. The rise and fall of a legendary snowmobile. The machine they didn't want you to have. That title isn't hyperbole. The 1972 Arctic Cat EXT was genuinely legendary, genuinely banned, genuinely a machine that racing officials tried to keep away from competitors. It rose to dominance through superior engineering, fell victim to politics and fear, but ultimately achieved immortality by forcing an entire industry to evolve. Every performance snowmobile you see today owes something to the EXT. Every lightweight chassis, every race-bred suspension, every manufacturer that prioritizes power-to-weight ratio is following the path that Arctic Cat blazed when they built a machine so good that it had to be banned. The story of the 72 EXT reminds us that greatness often comes with a cost. Arctic Cat paid that cost in legal fees, lost racing opportunities, and damaged relationships with sanctioning bodies. But they also gained something priceless, a legacy of innovation that continues to define them over 50 years later. They proved that a relatively small company could challenge industry giants. They showed that engineering excellence matters more than marketing budgets. They demonstrated that sometimes the best response to adversity is to build something even better. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, let me know in the comments what other legendary machines you want to hear about. There are so many incredible stories in powersports history, machines that changed everything, innovations that got banned or restricted, companies that refused to give up when everyone said they should. The 72 Arctic Cat EXT is just one chapter in a much larger story about human ingenuity, competitive spirit, and the relentless pursuit of speed. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe for more legendary machine stories, and I'll see you in the next video where we explore another piece of powersports history that deserves to be remembered.